the evidence is being processed? Does it contaminate the evidence in any way? How do you have this dual investigation? And I mean, the family reportedly believes that data may have been deleted from that phone. So that raises an interesting question, as well as why Nolan didn't have his phone. We've talked about that before. You're going into the water. Maybe you wouldn't have your phone. Maybe you leave it on board. But then again, if he was planning to go out and hang out with this girl, as the reports have been, why wouldn't he have taken his phone? So some interesting questions there.
They deleted messages from an 18-year-old's phone after he turned up dead. Let that sink in. Nolan Wells vanished off a boat on July 4th weekend. His body found 2 days later. And now we're learning that data was scrubbed.
The investigation into the death of 18-year-old Nolan Wells is picking up speed, as it's now being reported this case may be headed to a grand jury, just as newly released GPS data and dispatch audio are raising new questions about what happened in Nolan's final hours.
You already know what I'm about to say. When a young man disappears and the first instinct of the people around him isn't to scream for help, but to wipe a phone clean, we all know what that means. And look, I'm not telling you anything you haven't suspected from day one. Just like I know that something is being buried here. The person who refused to let that happen is Christine Wanley, Nolan's mother. While the local sheriff was busy telling the public there was no reason to suspect foul play, she was fighting. She's the one who got Ben Crump involved. She's the one who demanded an independent autopsy. She's the one who tracked her son's phone using Life 360 while official channels moved like molasses. And here's the thing though, that phone didn't just have a dead battery. The family says Snapchat history was missing. Text messages were gone. The digital footprints of an 18-year-old's final hours vanished. Christine Wanley is the silenced hero in this case, a mother who refused to let her son become another unsolved file. Another young man swallowed by the Gulf Coast while his so-called friends went home and said nothing. Now, here's where it gets interesting. We just found out that the district attorney, Angel McGrath, met with the family and agreed to a mutual inspection of Nolan's phone.
That Nolan's phone will undergo a, quote, mutual inspection, meaning both the state investigators and the family's own experts are going to analyze the phone. So that could potentially be a game changer here.
That means both the state's experts and the family's own forensic team will watch the extraction at the same time. Sounds fair, right? Actually, wait. Think about that for a second. Why would you need to watch unless you don't trust what they'd find? The family doesn't trust the Jackson County Sheriff's Office? I don't trust them. And I'm willing to bet you don't either. This is the same Sheriff John Ledbetter who rushed to tell everyone there was no evidence of a crime.
To be clear, by the way, last week, Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter indicated there is no reason to suspect foul play. We have no reason to believe that that conclusion or belief has changed.
Before the full autopsy, before the toxicology, before the phone was examined, before any real investigation, that's not how justice works. That's how a narrative gets locked in while evidence is still being scrubbed. And then we have the GPS data. CBS News obtained tracking from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, and it paints a timeline that raises more questions than it answers.
From the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, and it tracks the boat's movement. So I want to walk through that timeline. This is information they say they obtained via records request. So it appears to suggest that this boat, this vessel, left the dock at approximately 9:56 that morning, arrived at Horn Island at 11:14. According to GPS data, the boat then reportedly left Horn Island at 4:31 that afternoon, returned to its original departure dock, then traveled into Fort Bayou at around 5:52 before returning to the dock at 6:06. Later that evening, the boat went into the Fort Bayou boat launch at 7:19, traveled overland, which would suggest that it was possibly towed by a vehicle to the owner's residence. And to just kind of put this into perspective, I believe Ben Crump has claimed that Nolan was last seen on the island at 3 p.m. Tyler, what do you take away from this GPS data?
That if he was last seen on the island at 3 p.m. and they apparently, not only did they leave there go to another area, then go to dock and get towed. There's a lot that could have transpired between that time, especially putting that in conjunction with the text messages and Snapchat history that was allegedly deleted from his phone or missing from his phone. So there's a lot of time for people to get their stories straight, to talk to maybe counsel or others about what needs to be the narrative when they arrive. Now, I'm speculating to a lot of this because we don't know. There has been no interrogation of these individuals. There's been no official statements that have been issued, but it's clear that there's been a significant period of time between the boat leaving, the last time Nolan was seen, and this boat getting back to its original owner.
And look,
The boat left the dock around 9:06 that morning, arrived at Horn Island by 11:14. The family says Nolan was last seen on the island at 3 p.m. But according to the GPS, that boat didn't pull away from the island until 4:10:31. So what happened in that hour and a half? Where was Nolan? NBC News got hold of dispatch audio from when the boat was having trouble. Somebody calls for help, says the bilge pump failed, says they're sinking. And the voice on the line tells the operator, yeah, everybody's on board. They left him behind, or so they say. But if everybody was on board, then how did a college football player end up dead in the water with nobody noticing? The math doesn't add up. Not even close.
I mentioned this earlier. NBC News obtained this audio of what appears to be Nolan's friends calling for help for the boat, right? The boat was apparently having problems. I want you to take a listen to this.
We're sinking. Can y'all please come?
And is everybody on board in good health otherwise?
Yeah, everybody's on board.
Tyler, that's significant. That is a significant piece of this puzzle. What does that tell you? That there is this reported call about the boat that, by all accounts, Nolan was on at some point. It's having problems. Caller says everybody's on board. Again, we don't know for certain whether Nolan was on board during that call, but again, I think that's significant that this is happening. What does it tell you?
It's very significant. I mean, one, the statements that everybody is on board, and we don't know if Nolan was on board or not at the time, is very significant, given that he did not arrive back home safely when that boat reached dock later on that day. And he allegedly left or wanted to stay behind with a female that he met that day at that island on the lake. So it's very significant. The statements could either be, one, if it's not true, of course, it's a lie that everybody was not on board, or if he was on board at the time this call was made, what happened after that?
And if you're talking about now dispatch getting involved, there being a towing situation, I'm thinking more witnesses, eyewitnesses to what they saw about the boat or who was involved. And by the way, let me go to this part. So CBS News obtained GPS data.
I need you to stay with me here. I want to slow down for a minute. Because behind all the talk of grand juries and cell phone forensics, there's a mother planning her son's funeral. Christine Wanley still doesn't have the official incident report. In most places, you'd get that within 72 hours. She's still waiting. She had to fight just to get her boy's body transported for an independent autopsy because she doesn't trust what the state might rule.
One more point I want to ask you about the autopsies, right? So we have two things going on here. We're waiting for the results of both, right? We're waiting for the state autopsy. It seems that they're waiting toxicology reports. But then the family is, by all accounts, trying to do this independent autopsy out in Washington, D.C. What should we be thinking about these potential dual examinations of Nolan?
If there's a stark difference between the examinations, whether the state's examination leads to simply a drowning with no evidence of foul play or any strangulation or struggle versus a independent investigation from the family that shows otherwise, I think that makes it draws some suspicion. I think that just from the history of how unfortunately things have been in the South historically and still that we deal with today, and the way this investigation has rolled out, the family felt the need to do their own independent investigation. I think the toxicology report is going to be telling as well, because if you're in the water and you have some alcohol in your system, it may be more difficult to swim and things of that nature. So the toxicology report is going to be very important, and more information regarding the autopsy about his actual how he actually unfortunately lost his life is going to be relevant for both sides, whether the state sees this as evidence of there being foul play or the family sees it as more so evidence of the state not doing a thorough investigation and being willing to pursue charges.
And I'll be honest with you, something about this case has been eating at me. I have kids. If my child went out with friends and never came home, and the first people who should have protected him were deleting messages and giving conflicting stories, I wouldn't sleep until the truth was exposed. This isn't just a tragedy. It's a betrayal. Now, here's the part nobody talks about. The district attorney floating the idea of a grand jury isn't a sign that the system works. It's proof that the system had to be dragged.
This idea that, according to Ben Crump, right, that this may go to a grand jury once the investigation by the sheriff's office is complete. What do you think that would look like? I mean, what could the grand jury potentially be looking at here? What kind of evidence, what potential charges?
Well, ideally, they should look at all relevant evidence here that could lead them to make a conclusion whether they believe there's enough probable cause for criminal charges or not, and not be a grand jury that spoon fed particular information. And I think that's a big update because initially we know that the sheriff announced, I believe about a week ago, that they suspected no foul play. I do think this independent investigation, some of the pressure has allowed the DA to come to a different conclusion where there seems to be a joint agreement that this is going to go to a grand jury. So it could be text messages. It could be the lack of text messages. It could be cell phone data. It could be statements from different witnesses who could testify.
In other words, you're saying anybody looks at that and looks at a headline like, oh my gosh, you're talking homicide charges, but not necessarily. It could be something with respect to the investigation, like whether it's tampering with evidence or misleading police, something. I'm not saying those things happen, but that's what you're suggesting.
Right. It's anything that's a criminal charge pertaining to the disappearance and the death of this young man here could be a criminal charge. It could be obstruction of justice. All right. You could have some accessories after the fact. We don't know if it's going to be homicide or murder, but there could be some criminal charge that could come out of this. And I think that's all the family has been asking for is a fair investigation so they can know the truth.
Ben Crump made it clear that DA McGrath told the family there will be a grand jury once they've collected all the information.
There will be a grand jury that she will turn this case over to once they have collected all the information.
That's prosecutors speak for, we'll see if we have to.
We're kind of reading between the lines a little bit. I just want to take a step back. Is it significant that the DA met with the family or the DA met with the family's lawyer? Is that common? Does that signify to you something? I mean, we're kind of jumping here and saying it's possible that evidence could be presented to a grand jury, but it could very well not be presented to a grand jury. I'm curious, how significant is it that the DA reportedly met with the family?
This DA said that she commonly meets with families who have lost loved ones. That's one thing that she did say. But out of this, where you have a sheriff that said there's no foul play initially, and then you have the family demand an independent investigation, and then you have a meeting between the family and along with the family's lawyer, that is very significant. I think that shows that the public pressure and the national attention to this area of Mississippi has made the DA change some of the way she's addressing this by meeting with the victim's family and even coming to the extent of doing some joint things together with the victim's family and their attorney. That's not common in situations like this.
Because a grand jury can be spooned whatever the prosecutor wants. They can be shown only the evidence that supports a particular outcome. The family won't be in that room. Their lawyers won't be there. It's a closed door, and we've all seen how those closed doors work in small town Mississippi when powerful local names are involved.
If they don't present evidence to a grand jury, or they do present evidence to a grand jury and the grand jury chooses not to indict, A, two parts of that. What would that signal to you? And B, would we know about any of that?
Grand jury proceedings are secretive. So there will be, for example, no media coverage of the grand jury. There's no defense lawyers are not allowed to be there. The victim's family attorney, Ben Crump, won't be able to be there. It'll be a prosecutor who's presenting the case to the grand jury that's been impaneled. If they decline to press charges, there will ultimately be questions. People may wonder whether this grand jury was spoon-fed information that would lead them to come to a conclusion of there being no probable cause for an arrest. But I do believe if they do find that there's criminal charges out of the materials that are presented to them, it would affirm some of those suspicions that so many people have about how this has been handled and all the gaps that appear to be present in this investigation in the aftermath of Nolan's death.
But it's potential that the DA could choose not to go to a grand jury, or even if the grand jury does indict, does the DA have a legal obligation to move forward with the case?
Prosecutors have prosecutorial discretion, so they do not have to go to the grand jury. I believe it's my understanding that they have actually reached a joint agreement that they will present some evidence to the grand jury one way or the other. But the prosecutor can say, well, we decided not to do that. We don't believe there's anything. So they have discretion to pursue charges, not pursue charges, present evidence to a grand jury or not.
The sheriff's early, no foul play line already poisoned the well. And you know what's even more revealing? The phone itself. The family reportedly has had possession of Nolan's phone since they tracked it, and law enforcement didn't seize it. Now they're agreeing to a joint inspection only after national pressure.
So let me go on to this other major development from this week's press conference. The family is now going to be allowed to inspect Nolan's phone alongside investigators. There's going to be this mutual inspection where both sides will see the contents at the same time. Tyler, is that unusual? Let's first start there.
That's highly unusual. It's highly unusual that a victim's family, along with their attorney, would be allowed to participate with law enforcement in the inspection of a cell phone data that is really the crux, one of the crucial pieces of evidence with this case. I don't think that would have happened without a lot of the chatter going on around the country about how this investigation has transpired, and it shows there's some distrust between the family and law enforcement here. And there, from my understanding, there has been not the best communication with the DA and law enforcement and the family. So the concession to allowing a joint inspection, I think, is an attempt from the government or the state here to try to regain some of that trust with the victim's family.
And I thought it was also unusual, if the reporting is true and if this is accurate, that the family has been in possession of this phone and hasn't or turned it over to law enforcement yet. I mean, maybe that's not true, but this is what the reporting seems to suggest. I would, again, imagine that's a little unusual. But also, how does this work? How does a mutual inspection work exactly?
So there should be some forensic experts regarding data extraction present with the state, and also there will likely be an independent one that Mr. Crump's office has present with the DA at the same time. So that way, everybody can see it at the same time, whether all data is being extracted, make sure nothing's being left behind, because the big issue here is that the early announcement of no foul play, the evidence of the cell phone that the family received, I believe, a couple of days after Nolan went missing, or the night of, I can't recall the exact time, and then the missing of text messages and Snapchat data. And by allowing joint experts or a joint data extraction at the same time, it's going to help the family feel comfortable knowing that all data is being looked at, is not being piecemeal. Because oftentimes I've seen cases where there's been a cell phone data that's been extracted and the state says, oh, well, that's other information deleted, we can't get it. But that's not normal when a forensic expert can see what's been deleted, what's been altered in the data.
What was on that device that couldn't wait? Why did Snapchat messages disappear? Who deletes anything from a dead man's phone unless they're covering something up? This is the moment where everything clicks into place for the viewer who's been paying attention. The delayed incident report, the missing phone data, the boat that left without a head count, the sheriff closing the door before evidence was even gathered. This isn't incompetence. This is how a tight-knit community circles the wagons when one of their own might be in trouble. We've seen this script before. The case of an unsolved death where witnesses lawyer up immediately.
What are potential homicide charges here? Is there a theory of a case where if they can't prove that someone killed Nolan, but that was negligent in some way, what are some potential theories that you could see a homicide-related charge with happened to Nolan? And again, I know we're speculating here, but I'm just trying to understand what we could maybe see: manslaughter, negligent homicide, murder.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, there's so much still we don't know, but we do know there was some statements about there being an argument, whether that was Nolan in the argument or somebody else. So we don't know if there was some sort of altercation or fight. There was no interrogations by law enforcement of the individuals who were with him the day afterwards, right? There's been none of that we know of, that law enforcement has questioned any of these people who were out there on this boat at the island with Nolan Wells. So we don't know what happened, whether it was an argument, whether it was a fight, whether they knew that he was in a position where he could not swim and fend for himself in the water.
Where evidence goes missing, where the official story is that a healthy young man just drowned by accident, no struggle, no crime, move along. But the mother knows, and now we know. The truth doesn't sink in the gulf. It's buried under friendly handshakes and closed ranks. So now I'm asking you directly. What do you think they deleted from Nolan's phone? Was it a text about an argument on that island? A Snapchat video that showed something going wrong? Because an 18-year-old doesn't just leave his phone behind when he's planning to meet a girl.
And look, if messages were deleted, I think when you're talking about digital evidence, that can be pretty easy to show. I think it's also, just because something's deleted, you may think it's gone, but it's in the ether. It can be recovered. We've covered those cases all the time. I do think the location of the phone is another key component about this, right? So the family has said that first of all, it was unusual that Nolan would go off on his own, but also the idea that he would leave his phone behind. What teenager puts their phone down? But then you have this friend of Nolan's who told ABC News that, look, it's normal to leave phones on the boat. You're protecting them from the salt water. He said all their friends were out there, that they were not communicating with anyone else. Who else would they talk to? And he said that when Nolan got in the boat, he put his phone on the boat's dash along with probably 15 other phones. How do you see it?
That's not usual. I mean, even taking for what we've heard, that there was a young lady that he met named Katie and that he was interested in talking to her, you would think that he would want to be able to text her later on or get in contact with her later. I don't know many 18-year-olds who aren't glued to the hip to their phone. And even if they put their phone somewhere, if they're going to stay behind, they would definitely grab their phone. And so I think that seems suspicious, if anything. I hear the friend's position on it, but it draws many people some ire and gets to the same conclusion of, that doesn't sound like the 18-year-olds and 23-year-olds that we know. They like to have their phones on them and keep them close by.
He doesn't vanish in broad daylight while 7 people on a boat claim they didn't see a thing. They know what happened. The people on that boat know, and they're counting on this grand jury to be nothing but a formality. Prove them wrong. Tell me in the comments what you suspect was on that phone. Share this video. Let's make sure Nolan Wells doesn't become another name the system buries. We're not moving on. And neither should you.